Taras is a missionary that we as a church have supported and support, and is currently living with his family in Poland, but is from Belarus originally. We're going to hear a bit about his travels and why he decided to move his family to Poland a little bit later on. But first, we're going to ask him about his running. So welcome, Taras. Good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tom. Good to see you. Thank you so much for inviting me to come over.
Yeah, no problem. Do you just want to begin by maybe introducing yourself a bit? So tell us about your family, anything that you're doing work-wise at the moment. I know you're still finding your feet in Poland, but just an introduction into you and your family life.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Belarus, but it's very funny to think where I'm coming from ethnically. My father was born in Russia, but he's Ukrainian. My mom was born in Ukraine, but she's Russian. My brother was born in Kazakhstan, and I was born in Belarus, and I have no clue who I am. And my grandfather was a Polish man, so like I'm basically the person from the region. But I identify myself with Belarus and Belarusian soil, so I consider myself Belarusian. I was a pastor of the church back in Belarus that I planted in 2017 with a group of people, but I was forced to flee with the whole family in 2021, last year, because of the persecution from Belarusian regime, KGB in particular. Right now, I'm a pastor in another church here in Poland, in Warsaw, the one we planted just a couple of months ago with a few friends of mine. And run like crazy. That's one of the greatest joy of my life. I run a lot on a daily basis. Father of 3 and husband of 1. It's very important not to confuse this, because if I don't get this confused, husband of 3 and father of 1, that would be much more confusing.
I mean, your English is pretty good, so we couldn't excuse that mistake as an accident, I'm afraid. But yeah.
But in a nutshell,
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll hear a bit about your trip to from Belarus to Poland a bit later. But let's start with your running. Do you just want to just right at the start, for any runners who are in the room tonight, list off your PBs, 5K, 10K, marathon PB, just to give people an idea of where you're at in terms of your running.
Okay, so 800 meters to start. Okay, 400 meters, even though I wasn't a sprinter, I was long distance running. 400 meters, 50 seconds, 800, 153, 1500, 350, 5K, 1430, 10K, 29 something. Half marathon, I started running long distances when I quit kind of more or less professional running.
Okay.
So I did half marathon, and I think this year I set my PB actually. It was 1 hour, 10 minutes, but I feel I have guts to run much faster, so that's what I'm going for. And marathon, this spring I ran in 227.
227, brilliant. And I mean it's fantastic. And for those who aren't as into running, could you just, for your marathon time, could you just give a breakdown of what is that in terms of minute mile or minute a kilometer?
So that would be, the average pace was 3:28 per kilometer, so that would be like around slightly faster than 17 minutes per 5K and around 34-40 per each 10Ks.
Yeah,
I guess I'm not thinking in miles, I'm thinking in kilometers.
No, that's fine. Yeah. And it's just worth saying for people who aren't runners or don't run that often, if you just go out and try to run just 1 kilometer in 3 minutes 28, you'll get an idea of what pace that is to sustain over a marathon distance. So it's fantastic. So you clearly know what you're talking about when it comes to running. As you said, you're passionate about it. You are very kind of accomplished in the running world. You talked about running professionally. Do you just want to tell us a bit about how you got into professional running, or when you first realized that you wanted to kind of compete professionally as a runner? How did that kind of passion begin?
Well, I think my passion for running has like a lot of layers, like, in a cabbage. I'm not sure this is a very right illustration, but this is like
we get it.
I get from my Russian-speaking mind. In some ways, my passion was grown out of hopelessness. In some way, it was grown out of need. So the place, I'll say the need, the place I grew up in, Minsk, Belarus, like I always love to joke and mess around. Like it was very dangerous place, and there are a lot of criminal stuff happening in the place I grew up. So if you wanted to survive, you needed to run fast. And so I wanted to leave. And so I had to run fast pretty much everywhere you go because you're constantly in danger. So that was like a survival skill, like, you constantly can get in trouble. So like, you better run away from there. But in other way, it was grown out of hopelessness. So I was growing in 90s. It was the time in Belarus, straight after Soviet Union fell apart. And the part of the town I grew up in was consisted from two main groups of people. The first were military people, and second, there were people who were released from prison. The idea the Soviet Union had was that these two groups of people will be mixed together, and that military people, they will influence people that just got released from prison, and it will affect them for good. But in reality, the opposite happened. Both groups of people were very depressed. So those who came from Afghanistan war, for example, they realized that there was absolutely meaningless war. And so they were like drinking heavily. And those who were released from prison, they had no hope and no future, and no way how they can move back into the society. And so both groups of people became severely alcohol addicts and drug addicts. And growing up in that place was a quite depressing experience, because it's just you're growing in the place of hopelessness. Like people have no hope. And people try to sublimate this dissatisfaction with life in form of escapism, in alcohol addiction and drug addiction. And my family was one of these people I'm talking about. Like my dad, even though he was super successful man in many ways, he ended up being an alcohol addict. So did my mom. And so just seeing that kind of environment was so depressing. And like running was one of the form how I was sublimating my inner desires for something greater, for something bigger in life. So
that's really interesting. So there's a sense in which you did it for the practical reason of having to escape violent people in the community you lived in, but also a sense of trying to find meaning in life, really, and a more wholesome way of escaping reality. So one way of escaping would be alcohol, drug addiction, violence, gang crime. Perhaps another way of escaping for you was to sort of channel it into something a bit more wholesome, healthy, and active. And that's a really interesting thing. And so how did you move from that kind of initial way of using running? When did you realize, oh, I'm actually like quite good at this? Maybe I should go and compete. Maybe because you ended up in the Belarusian national team, didn't you? So just talk us through that journey.
Yeah. So there was like, I don't know whether you have the same in the UK, but in Belarus, like at the PEA, you have to pass some tests. So one of the tests was you have to run like in the FIFA 6th grade, you have to run 1500. And I ran pretty decently again. And I ran decently because like I had to run everywhere because this is a survival skill. So I went to participate in a local competition and I won it. And then like a few weeks later, I went to the Minsk championship and I came second. And after a few weeks, they said, well, now you can represent Minsk in national championship. Right. And I went there to the national championship. There was like a junior national championship. The miracle didn't happen. I was one of the last ones, to be honest, because like the gap of the between me and other guys was like 2 years, and I was like super skinny, like very short guy, and there were like massive guys coming in front of me, and so they were smashing me through the whole distance. But that was the first championship, and like they put me in the hotel, they gave me some pocket money, and that was like so exciting for me because finally I realized I can achieve something in life. And again, that was related with escaping from this hopeless community. Like I realized I can see the world, I can try to achieve something. So in some ways I was trying to find my identity just by running and achieving, beating other people. And gradually I started, because I won a few of these races, the local coach, he said like, hey, you should start training. And so I started coming to regular trainings of a local club. And from that, I started slowly progressing. There wasn't like massive immediate progress. I think it took me like another 5 years before I won my first national championship.
Great. And so did that take you around the place in terms of, did you travel like with an athletics track and field team or anything like that? Did you go overseas to compete, or, I mean?
Yes, yeah. So I think in 2005 was the first time when I came third, I think, in the national championship in cross country, and the first four, they were representing the country in European championship, and we went to Netherlands. That was the first time when I went outside of Belarus. And it was an amazing experience, because like Netherlands and Belarus, it's like you're talking about two different worlds, you know. It's like Thomas More world of utopia, and there's like a world of I don't know, Nazi during Second World War. That would be pretty much, well, maybe I'm slightly exaggerating, but going there was so exciting. I remember there was like do you call it a buffet? Yeah, when you have anything you want to. Because that was my first experience with this kind of stuff. And there was like a buffet of like 50 meters in two different halls. And I was like, my Belarus and Hungary eyes were like, I need to eat everything over here. And so I put like the whole mountain of my plate, and I mixed the products that cannot be mixed together.
No.
And the night before the race, brother, I was a mess. I was sorry for saying that, but like from every hole in my body, something was coming out.
Okay, thank you, brother. Yeah.
I was puking.
That was the night before the race.
Yeah, just night before the race.
Yeah, so okay, right.
So that was the first European Championship. That's my first experience. And this is like you have to represent the team. So like each place combined, that's your team place, basically.
Okay, yeah.
And I was in pretty decent shape. And so I went to the start line, and I feel I'm absolutely empty. There's nothing in me. Like I have nothing to run, like no fuel whatsoever. I didn't sleep through the whole night.
There's 50 meters worth of buffets come out of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the guy gives the start. He, how do you call it? Like he.
Yeah.
And we had like the leader of the team who was very decent. And somehow like I didn't run from the gate really well. And I pushed him, and he like landed in the mud like a sausage, absolutely flat. So he had to chase the whole gang after that. Yeah. And I remember, so I'm running, I'm coming to the finish line, and I know I'm at the very end of everyone. And I look back, and I saw the limping guy who's like barely basically moving. He's like not even running, he's crawling. So that first championship, I came.
So this is Belarus on the national stage, representing the country of Belarus.
Yeah. And so I came 97 out of 102, I guess, or something.
Right, okay.
I was very like, the 5 people behind me were like sick lepers, like who couldn't run at all.
Right. Wow. Okay.
I remember in Belarusian media, not media, but local newspapers, like they wrote how other guys, what was their place from Belarusian team? There was one guy who was 6th, another 17th, and then my 97 sunk the ship of our team totally, completely. We were like way at the bottom. I still remember these lines in a local newspaper, and only Taras Tilkovsky wasn't ready for the test of a cross championship. And I was like, my coach was reading it and my team, and I was like, I was so ashamed of that. Next year, that was a different story. I learned a lesson, and I read
your lesson. Okay, great. Oh, well, thanks for telling us that. I mean, and just, I mean, jumping on a bit now. So you've had a professional life as a runner. And just tell us a bit about, so, you know, when you were over here in the UK, which you were for some time, you took part in park runs locally here in Kingston, didn't you? You did the Bushy Park one and did pretty well in that, didn't you? And then went back to Minsk, and you started park run, didn't you, over in Minsk? Is that right? And
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I was doing park run because, like, I just the Bushy Park. I was living in where Kingston Church is, and I was living in Chessington. And Bushy Park is the hometown of all park runs in the world. So you have like 1,200 runners coming there like every Saturday. It was such an exciting experience. So I started going there, and the first race I came second. And by that time I quit professional running, but this sense of competitiveness is still in me. So I thought, I need to smash all of these guys. So I started training back again in London. I would like cycle to my studies in London, near London Bridge and back, and after that would go for a run from time to time. Eventually I won most of the Bushy Park runs I participated in. You can check the stats if you're interested for 2014 and 2015. You will see my name. And I'm quite proud of it.
Not number 97.
But I had a friend of mine came from Belarus. He saw the park run, and it was such an exciting idea. And he went back to Belarus, got registered the whole brand, and we started doing pretty much the same thing, meeting locally and running 5K. And people started getting like an alternative to their Saturdays. Instead of spending time before the TV screen and alcohol, they're like, you can do some activity with your family and run 5K, improve your health, and get some fun in the community. So that was great fun.
And most recently, we'll move off running after this, but most recently you ran the marathon in Poland, didn't you, recently? Or sort of moved into marathon running? Just tell us about that.
Not only marathon, a couple other races. I did marathon in Łódź, and I partially combined it with a performance in some way. I told my kids about parents in Ukraine who lost their children because of the war, because of the bombing, and because of terrorist attacks that Russia is doing on Ukraine. And my kids were so moved. Some of us started even crying. And I said, what we can do for them? And we said, like, well, we can at least raise awareness about these parents and about the pain they're going through. And we can somehow help them. So I said to my kids, well, why don't we draw little children on my legs as I'm going to go for a run, like in memory of those kids who died in Ukrainian war, in commemoration of their lives and in support of their parents, like saying, you're not forgotten, people are praying for you. And I know it's not going to release any pain from your life whatsoever, but at least you're in prayers and hearts of many people. And I said with you, like, if there's a chance I will win any money from this race, I'll give money to parents who lost their kids. And because I wasn't really super ready for the marathon, but I was really surprised that I set my new personal best, came fourth overall. There was one Kenyan runner, and there were two Polish professional runners before me, so I came fourth. And I got like around $700, like 600 pounds for the fourth place, and that's the money we gave to one of the families who lost their children. But the funny thing was, the week later there was a national constitution. They had like a race dedicated to Constitution that was established like in 18th century. The funny thing that Belarusian was one of the guy who was writing the Constitution. And I won the race. There was 5K. There was like 6,000 runners. I won the 5K. And like, at the end of the race, like all interviewers, they were excited, thinking like, oh, Polish runner will tell us something. And here's like Belarusian. And they like, because there's so much conflict right now with Belarus and Belarusian regime and Lukashenko, the first question, what do you think about Lukashenko and Putin? Because they were afraid, like, if there's in any way I support them, there will be a disaster. Like, the Constitution race, and the guy who's pro-dictator regime wins the race. But I released the pressure from them, saying, I'm a refugee here, don't worry, I hate these bloody dictators.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's move to that now. So as you said, and as we picked up, you came with your family from Belarus to Poland, from a church that you established, from a country that you still love in many ways, and you relocated to Poland. It's a different language. Your kids have been going to schools, learning a different language. That's been difficult for them. So just talk us through, because I mean, lots of people will know, all of us will know about Russia and Putin's aggression in Ukraine at the moment, but people might be less familiar with with kind of the story of Belarus and what's happened there politically over the last few years. So could you just colour that in a bit for us and talk us through your decision to eventually move from that country that you love to Poland, and the kind of steps you took as a family in doing that?
Yeah. 2 years ago, we had an election, president election. And for those who don't know, we've had the same president now for 29 years. He used to be called the last dictator of Europe. Well, I think now he shares this glorious title with Vladimir Putin. But before war, Lukashenko used to be called the last dictator of Europe. Majority of elections we had in previous years were totally hijacked, and it was a total fraud. But in 2020, people were so fed up with Lukashenko and Belarusian regime. We were one of the only countries in the world that denied coronavirus. So people were dying, our hospitals were packed, the amount of funeral was crazy, and yet Lukashenko and his regime were saying like, there's no coronavirus in Belarus. We had like a very few people who got sick. And that, yeah, people were like so fed up. And so there was a vibe of possible change in the atmosphere. So we had few alternative guys who started running for presidency in 2020. Unfortunately, all of them were arrested before the election date. Lukashenko and his bloody regime, they made a fraud case saying they broke some laws and did something against the country and constitution, so they deserve to be punished and imprisoned. But yet they gave the opportunity, Lukashenko's regime gave the opportunity for one lady whose husband was in prison and who ran for presidency to promote her, to put herself instead of her husband to run for the presidency. And Belarusian people united around her. They said, we're gonna vote for her, because she basically was sublimating people's desire for change and for something new in our country. And I would say maybe 70 or maybe 80% even of Belarusian voted for her. But Belarusian regime totally hijacked the elections, and Lukashenko said 85% voted for him. Everyone knew that it's a fraud. Lukashenko knew it, Belarusian knew it, the rest of the world knew it. And people went on the streets to protest, saying like, we're fed up with it. Lukashenko's regime responded with crazy violence. They arrested 40,000 people in the first few weeks of protests, and people were going on protests nonstop. To the violence, people were responding with more and more protest. And as a Christian minister, I couldn't flee from that pain and from the conflict that we have in our society. Even though there are a lot of Belarusian ministers and Christian pastors and preachers and priests, they're saying, we have nothing to do with this world. We have nothing to do with injustice and pain of this world. We're all about heaven. We're all about eternal life. We have nothing to do with that. And I think, I'm not going to go in details, but I think it's very wrong understanding of Christian faith. And so as a Christian minister, I was speaking a lot against the Belarusian regime and its atrocities. I was reminding to Belarusian authorities that they're not final authority. Yeah. There's authority above them, and they need to submit to this final authority. And God's authority tell them what is their purpose, how they should reign, how they should use their power over people in society. How they need to create the structure where life is flourish and human creativity is flourishing, and how we should treat one another with dignity that is God-given dignity. And so, of course, Belarusian regime does not forgive that kind of stuff. I was given interviews to different newspapers and different media, giving Christian perspective on the whole conflict in Belarusian society. I was arrested at the end of, during the protest, imprisoned for a very short amount of time, then was released, had a trial, they made me guilty. I remember the court, I went, even though I know some people hate official minister clergy robes, but I wore the robe, like
Yeah.
clergy robe, dog color, how do you call it?
Yeah.
And so there was a funny moment, like, you know, the judge wears the robe, like I'm an authority here, and I came in robe, like saying I'm also representing authority over here.
Right.
And she was trying to say you broke these laws and laws and so on and so forth. And I was pointing to her that no, you are breaking God's laws, and the way you treat in humanity and the way you treat in Belarusians, how you lie, how you beat people on the streets. You're breaking God's laws, and you will give an account. So that was very interesting moment for me in life, an interesting experience. Yeah, they made me guilty, gave me a fine. Yeah, I was released, but I kept saying a lot of stuff against regime, continuing to support those who were protesting, trying to give like a healthy Christian perspective on everything that is happening. And then I started being followed by KGB. We started being spy after. Most of my accounts in social media were hacked. We had our car was followed by. We have no clue what these agents, who were these agents, but obviously I started like being spy after. And to be honest, I wish I could say that I was such a strong man and I could like resist and respond to that with more strength and more stamina and more courage. But I felt my like insanity started breaking at this point. Like I even sorry for such details. I remember myself going to the toilet and not being able to relax just to do number one in the toilet because you're so dense and so stressed in your mind. Like you can't relax for a second to just do your normal physiological activity. I think mainly what's happening because I was just focusing way so much on the regime and what they're doing. And Belarusian regime is entirely godless. It has no restrictions and no limits, no morals whatsoever. They're so thirsty for their power that they're willing to do anything to humanity and anyone who is standing in their way to maintain this power. So yeah, I was followed. Then after a while, I got a phone call from officials saying that I'm a witness of a crime I have no clue about. They asked me to come.
Right.
To be honest, at that point, I wanted to flee because already many things happened. Like many friends of mine were arrested, and when the interrogator from KGB would come, they would question them for 40 minutes, mainly about me, my activity, my investment in my partnership with the Western world. Again, like even studying in London for 2 years, like by Belarusian regime, they might see that, well, I might be recruited by any special forces to serve their needs and like, you know, hijack Belarusian regime or whatever, I don't know. So many friends of mine being interrogated by agents, like who is he, how he's connected with the Western world, and my kind of understanding that this circle around me is getting smaller and smaller, and there's just a small amount of time when I'll be arrested and in prison. I went to this another interrogated process, into this another interview with officials. They made me an interview. They made me a witness of a crime I have no clue about. And they asked me to give me my phone at the end of the interview. That's what they do. Like, you know, they hijack all of your media and all of your emails. I didn't bring my phone with me. I knew that's what they're going to ask me for. And they said, like, please come on Monday. And during this, the interview was on Friday. And on Sunday, we left with my whole family. And we didn't leave for good. I was thinking maybe we'll have just for a very short amount of time. But within 2 months, a few friends of mine were arrested. And again, when they were interrogated by the agent from KGB, they were asking about me. And for me, that was one of the sign that if I go back, I will end up in prison. And for some people, I know there are some people who are courageous enough saying like, you need not only to raise the voice against injustice, but you need to be willing to pay the price to suffer for the truth. And I realized I was willing to raise my voice for the truth and against injustice, but I realized I wasn't willing to pay the full price, like to face the Belarusian regime entirely.
So, well, you say you weren't willing to pay the full price, but from another perspective, just hearing about the experiences you went through, you know, the mental anguish that you experienced, the time you spent in prison, the court trials that you had to go through, and not just you, members of the church community who were arrested. You know, I think most of us would say that is a pretty high price you've already paid for speaking out against the regime and for doing so from a Christian perspective. And so, thanks for telling us that story so clearly. And then, so you decided to stay in Poland. You're making a new life in Poland. You were saying at the beginning you're beginning to pastor a new church there, which is in its infancy still. But it would be great to hear a bit about what life is like for you now on the ground in Poland. So we know that lots of Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war have come over the borders and into Poland, and I know that that's presented an opportunity for you, hasn't it, as both one of those refugees in one sense, but also now in a position to serve others who are fleeing. Do you just want to just outline what you've been doing since you left Belarus? You know.
Yeah, absolutely. For a while, we were stuck in the middle of nowhere because, like, you know, back in Belarus, we had the whole life sorted. We had the place to live. We had a church to pastor. Like, there was my culture. There was my people in the sense of, like, I knew everything. There was the whole life. And then we ended up, like, in a foreign land with a foreign culture, with a foreign language. And for a while, we were just stuck between nowhere. And we were expecting and hoping that things might change very quickly and we will have a chance to go back to Belarus. So for a while, I would say we were doing nothing. That's, if you allow me, brother, just to go back for 1 second before I'll get back to the question. I was reading Viktor Frankl. If some of you might heard the name, this is a psychiatrist who went through many of the concentration camps during the Second World War, through the Nazi concentration camps. And he was providing psychological help for imprisoned people. And it's interesting, he said in in a few of his books, he was saying the first people who were dying in the concentration camps were those who completely lost the hope that things will ever change. They was like, it's all meaningless. There's no hope. There's no future. That's it. This is the end. These were the first people who were dying. The second group of people who were giving up and dying quickly there were those who were expecting changes that will come quickly. So they were saying, just another 2 weeks and things will go well. And then 2 weeks later, things went even worse. And so they were losing its all hope, and they were the second group of people who were dying. And the only group of people who was able to survive and maintain life were those who were not expecting anything to change quickly, and yet they were maintaining the hope that one day things will go for good, that there will be some good happening. And that was one of his psychological trick, if you can put it in these words, how he used. He was trying to elevate people from the moment of the current pain to the situation where this pain will be no more, and there'll be place where will be space of life where they will be flourished. And it was a very complicated thing, but I noticed the same happening right now. Those people who are losing their sanity and losing their connection with other people, even with themselves, those who are like, there's no hope, it's all meaningless, so stupid, that's it. And it's hard to, like, for these people, like, they're going, this pain is killing them on a daily basis. Those who are expecting quick changes, I see them around myself, they're like, losing motivation very quickly and falling back in depression as well. And I think in some ways, we were in the second group of people. We were expecting changes would come very quickly to Belarus, like regime will fall and we'll return back to the country, go back to their house, hug our relatives. It's not happening. It's 15 months now. So I realized this desire for quick change is it's a poison for soul, poison for life. And when the war started, I realized I can't do everything. I can't hug the world, but I can't do nothing. I have to do something. I have no clue what's going to be the future, a nuclear war, will this war ever end? But I can't respond to this war with just numbness, like just getting up. And I have to do something. So I organized a group of Belarusian people saying we should try to provide humanitarian relief to as many Ukrainians as possible. We can't provide to everyone, but we need to provide it to as many as possible. And like immediately we had like 20 people who volunteered to help. And we basically created, like we had a few IT guys and they created fantastic systems. So people would fill the form and it would drop into the system. Like, this is my need, this is where I am. And in the system, we would have people who were willing to fill the need in any ways. Like, we can provide shelter, we can provide housing, we can provide transportation from the border, we can give finances. And so in the hub, in the center, we were basically working, trying to connect those in need with those who can help. And I think in the first 10 days, we helped, like, I don't know, at least 300 Ukrainian families at its minimum. So we try to take the first shock of the war as much as they can. Later on,
it would have been good. It would have been good to have you in our government, I think, actually. You know, by the sounds of that list of needs, list of how we can provide, put it together. Yeah, you would have been quite useful over here, I think, brother. That might be a bit cynical of me, but that's probably true.
Well, it's only in words. I'm so organized and structured, you know, brother. In reality, administration and myself not working well together.
Well, that sounds great.
So, and later on, we started. Now, what I realized, I go on every Tuesday. I go to refugee center, and now I see these people who come. They come to get humanitarian aid, and there's one thing I see so clearly, and I really want to emphasize it. I remember the words of Jesus Christ that. What is that in English? Not by bread alone, human beings are alive. Can you, brother, help me to phrase it in English?
Yeah, man shall not live by bread alone, but from every word that comes from the mouth of God.
Exactly. Sorry, I don't remember that in English, but I come there and I see, brother, that we are much more than our physical and material needs. So we give them bread, we give them food to eat, and they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're empty. And I open up the scripture with these people and I try to bring the comfort from the word of God to not nourish only their bodies with this food, but nourish their eternal souls, their mind with a greater perspective than the pain they're experiencing in the moment. And it was so amazing to see that they, when they're really hearing the words of God, when they're going away from that, they're nourished, they're getting a sense of hope, they're having perspective in their life. And so we try right now to provide some holistic help for people, not only to relieve immediate humanitarian need they have. We do that, but we also try to care for their eternal souls. So now the focus changed. Now we're not caring only for like their immediate needs, but we try to serve with those things we can serve the best with the Word of God. That's what we do at the moment.
Thank you very much. That sounds brilliant. And that's a good place to kind of transition to the kind of the next and in some ways last bit of the interview. So you've talked throughout this interview and specifically in the last few minutes about how your convictions as a Christian have shaped how you've responded to this refugee crisis in Poland, shaped how you've spoken out against the regime in Belarus. It was why you came to England to study for Christian ministry. You've been involved in church planting. So that's been a huge part of your life. And just to kind of join the dots a bit with the running stuff, a few years ago, you undertook a massive endurance challenge, which was to run 500 kilometers in 5 days in Belarus. So that's 2.5 marathons a day for 5 days straight. Which is just a phenomenal feat. And it was a fantastic thing because you had people filming it. There was a live stream so that people could tune in and ask you questions as you were running along and suffering. I'm sure you've got loads of memories about that. Do you just want to tell us, I mean, firstly, a little bit about that challenge, but secondly, why you chose 500 kilometers in 5 days, why you did that? Because it links in with your Christian convictions, doesn't it?
Yeah. In 2017, we were celebrating 500 years, not only of Reformation, when Luther knocked his 95 Theses, which happened yesterday, 505 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we're talking
not yesterday, but yeah, we're filming on the 1st of November. So it's 31st of October yesterday. Yeah.
Yes. And majority of churches, they were organizing some cultural events for these kind of for the Reformation. Oh, sorry, I didn't say that. That in 1517, there was a Belarusian guy who translated Bible into Belarusian language. Not the whole Bible, but majority of the Bible books into Belarusian language. We were the fourth country in the world, the fourth ethnic group that had a Bible in their national language. I'm not sure, but Tyndale translated Bible to English like 15 years only after that. So we had it before that. But amazing thing about Bible is that it's not the book only just about doctrines and ideas. It's a book of life. That's how I see Bible. It's a book full of life. It tells us about life. It invites us to experience life. And this is how I see this book. And I personally experienced this book reviving my soul. If you remember in the beginning, I was telling a lot about hopelessness that I experienced in my community because people had no hope in life. And what Bible revealed me is there's meaning to life. There is sense in everything. There is a greater things that I can see and experience on a daily basis. And churches were organizing cultural events, and it wasn't attracting much attention from society because, like, they would say, "Come to hear lecture on Bible and some music," and people would be like, "Oh, fantastic, thank you."
Yeah.
And I thought, how can I combine my skills with my passion for Bible? And I try to combine my running with Bible. So I decided to run 500 kilometers in commemoration of 500 years of Belarusian Bible and Reformation. And by doing that, like something extreme, I was trying to say, look, these ideas that were relevant 500 years ago, they're so relevant now because truth matters, meaning matters, life matters. And these things, they don't have expiration date. It's not like you can say like they were valid back then. They're so important nowadays. And Bible transformed Belarusian society 500 years ago, literally 16th century called Golden Age of Belarus. And only historians talk about that because many people like forget about history. But it was Golden Age because biblical worldview and the ideas shaped society in all levels, on political levels, on cultural levels, on every level. And when people started undigging, exploring the depth and beauty of biblical worldview and started building society on that foundation, we experienced revival. And in 2017, when Belarus was, well, pretty in a horrible state, even now, the amount of suicide, we're one of the leading countries in the world. The amount of kids that are in orphanages, we're one of the leading countries in the world. The amount of alcohol and drug addicts, we're one of the leading countries in the world. The amount of divorces, 8 out of 10. And this is not talking about only about even political system and economic system, which is extraordinary. So I was trying to say to people, well, it's just because we're building society in our wisdom, and look what kind of society we have. We have, I'm sorry for this word, but I would say crap. We have crap. We have like pain, tears, death. We have nothing beautiful. And look, back then, when we built society based on this book, we had something beautiful. And this is, if we start exploring, digging it deep again, and try to bring it back to our communities, we can experience revival again, because this word doesn't have expiration date. It's the eternal word of living God. So I was really trying to, through this sport event, communicate with our society, with Belarusian country. That was one of the big desires I had, because I didn't have any passion for just ideas or for my running. There was more, I hope it was love for my community and for my people. That was driven me to run it.
Brilliant. Well, it was a joy for us to be able to kind of share in that experience with you. I mean, obviously we went through none of the suffering that you endured, but it was good to be able to see it on that live stream and to see that enthusiasm for the Bible combined with your natural abilities, just working so well to raise attention about the Bible. Just as we kind of come to the end, last couple of questions. Your enthusiasm for the Bible and the life message that the Bible offers is really plain. Do you just want to tell us, because you said at the beginning, you didn't grow up necessarily in a home or in a context where The message of Jesus was very prominent in your life. In fact, it sounded like there was crime and alcohol addiction in the home. Just tell us then about your own personal journey, in this theme of running, of running away from God, perhaps, and being found by God, and personally yourself becoming a Christian.
I think it was again, like in the beginning, with my passion for running, many layers, and quite a few layers with how I became a Christian. I will not go into details with everything, but share a few. It's interesting. My parents baptized me in Russian Orthodox Church at the age of 6. That's more a superstitious thing, rather like a understanding of the baptism. But it was such a dramatic experience for me. So next day I went to kindergarten and I started telling everyone about God. And I got a nickname, Preacher.
Wow.
Like, who knew that kids prophetically would give me something that I would commit my life to later on in life. I grew up in house of cultural Christians, I would say. Parents would go to church twice a year to do some rituals, to put some candles, but there was nothing of Christian faith, like in biblical understanding of it, in my house or in the community whatsoever. It's more about tradition and superstitions rather than Christian faith. What played a huge role in me started thinking deeper about issues of life and faith was my father. As I mentioned in the beginning, he was a very successful man. Back in Soviet Union time, he was a colonel in Soviet army. He participated in Afghanistan war. So he had basically just one step before general. Soviet Union fell apart and he went into politics, and he was he was super sharp man. He was a very successful politician. He was chief executive for human rights in Belarusian parliament, quite high ranking. After a while, he left from the parliament and started doing business, and was very successful in business. He was like, when I remember in the beginning of 90s, when everyone was very poor, our family was flourishing. Like, we had 2 cars, our fridges were packed with food, when other people were having like nothing. And after a while, he went into law stuff. He got his third master's in law, and became a lawyer. And again, because of the connection and because of his sharpness, he hasn't lost any case for quite a few years. And back then he was, I'm not entirely sure whether it's right or not, but I think he was one of the members of national Soviet Union team in high jump in track and field. So he was like, basically what I'm trying to say, like whatever he touched, like, can turn it into gold. He was a successful man, sharp man, good marriage, decent kids. And he ended up in severe alcohol addiction, like drinking literally, I mean, sometimes 2 weeks in a row. And I'm seeing my father drunk. And for me, it was, painful, because like in your parents, you try to find, both comfort and answers for deep issues of life. I get none. And I remember when my father was sober and in pain, I was asking him, like, Dad, you had everything in life that most people desire for. Why are you drinking nonstop? And he said very interesting thing that stuck with me for the rest of my life. It's in my bones. It's not even in my mind. He said, nothing brought me satisfaction. Alcohol became a good way of escapism from the pain of reality. And it stuck with me so deeply that I said to myself that I'm not going to repeat the life of my father. And I started searching for meaning. Like, is there a meaning? Is there more to life than just success, politics, sport, and achievement? And for a while, sport was the heart of my identity. I thought, well, once I win these races, I will become satisfied. I will be full of life. And I remember I won most of the races I kind of dreamed of winning, like national championship, represent a national team. But this sense of emptiness haunted me. And I remember I started going to Russian Orthodox Church and praying with a very simple prayer. God, if you're there, I really want to know you for who you are, not who I'm trying to imagine to myself. That was important for me, because I would go to Russian Orthodox Church, and it's not word-driven communities, it's image-driven communities that are open for your own interpretation. You go, you see this mystical building with a lot of icons and candles and all this mystical experience. And you can interpret this experience in any way you want. So I would go
Yeah.
see the icon, and I would ask some questions that are burning within me, like, can you have sex with girl before marriage? And I would look at the saint and he's smiling, and I would think to myself, well, probably he's saying yes. That's how I was building my
He looks
theology.
positive. Yeah.
And so I started praying, like, God, I really want to know you for who you are, not who I'm just. I realized that God becomes basically the projection of my desires. I'm worshiping the God I built in my own imagination. And in 2008, I was invited to English courses organized by American Baptists. And I went there, and at the end, they asked me whether you would love to know more about Bible and Christian faith and Jesus. And I ticked all the boxes, says, yes, yes, yes. None of people ever contacted me, even though I was so willing to hear about Jesus and Bible. But in God's providence, I was invited to the church that was involved with organizing these courses. And there, for the first time in my life, I heard clear Bible presentation. Preacher opened the scripture, read the passage, and explained in simple terms and words who Jesus is, why he came to this earth, and what does it mean to be his disciple and follower of him. For me, there was, I would say, close to experience that Luther described in his own life when he found out that God is not just judge, that is he's willing to condemn him and who's the one who's stealing the joy from you, but God is a savior who wants to redeem you from this meaningless and hopelessness of this life, to take your burden and sins and give you his beautiful new identity. And there was, I still remember, there was like eye, soul, mind opening experience in my life. I wouldn't say that was the only moment and I turned my but there was one of the moments when I understood what Christian faith is all about.
Yeah.
And I became a Christian.
Yeah.
One thing I realized later is that, you know, sportsmen and runners, they're full of themselves. You basically want to beat everyone and prove yourself to the world and say, look at me and admire me. And not probably, it would be unfair if I say I'm not that person. I was that person. I was saying, like, winning everyone, like, look how glorious I am. But when I became a Christian, I realized there's someone who's much more beautiful than I am. And people will never find any answers of life in me, but they will find answers in the person of Jesus. And so I realized I want to commit my life not to making people serve me and admire me, but helping people to see who Jesus is.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and that's been clear in everything you've said. Really good, Taras. I think we'll call it there on the interview. But it's been great to hear all of your story and the way in which the different bits of your story just connect in all kinds of different ways. It's been a joy to talk to you, and I hope everyone who's been listening in has got something out of it. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, brother.